long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We feel it inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We feel it inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. Feel it inside, yeah. Feel it inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power. Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We feel it inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power. Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power. Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah. thinking I'm a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's go. We got the power.
There we go. There's a 10-second delay, so there's that thing where I give you a 10-second spiel and then I'm immediately met with 47 muted, no audios, and F. All right, hey everybody. Sorry, it's been a long couple of weeks. So, welcome back to Exterior Environments for the Unreal Engine Short Film Challenge in Australia. For anyone that's been following along for the last couple of sessions, thanks for coming back. For anyone that's just here for the first time, it's good to have you. We'll be going through creating an open world today, so we're going to be looking at covering some of the tool sets involved in creating outdoor environments, and we're going to be kind of stepping through just how to correctly light some of these things, settings to make sure that you have enabled, just that kind of stuff. Now, it's kind of a bit of a strange one, and it will be going through quite a lot of tools, but hopefully everyone can keep up pretty well. I'll do my best to try and take it slow enough that people can understand what's going on, but I will still be trying to cover as much content as I can inside the period. Folks are always welcome to email us and let us know anything, any questions that they have, they want to follow up on. We strongly recommend people get engaged with the wider community, be it through some of the Facebook groups, through the official forums, and also through the unofficial Unreal Engine Oceanic Discord, which I think yesterday alone we had another 100 people sign up because of this challenge. So we've been seeing some really great numbers, and there's a great community there. As well as that, there's there's been a short film challenge, kind of like a job search. What's the word I'm looking for here? I have Alex Stevens and Tony Reed on the line, by the way, who will drop in as voices coming in every now and then.
Yeah, there's a Discord channel for looking for a team.
Looking for a team. That's the phrase I was after. So, yeah, if you want to get involved outside of what we're doing for these sessions, those are all really great points. There's an Unreal Engine Australia group, and as well as that, there is an Unreal Engine Virtual Production Facebook group that's really, really impressive. Honestly, every time I think I'm getting a handle on virtual production, I'll open up that Facebook group and just see some of the incredible stuff the community is doing, and I'm like, all right, I guess I'll do my homework this week again. Anyway, so welcome everybody. Let's get this going. Just before we go into that, I said this during the 10 seconds of silence, but I'm Chris Murphy. I handle evangelism in Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. My job is to just support developers. Pre-pandemic, it was dropping on site for various teams and looking at what they're doing and helping out with various technical stuff. Now, during this whole situation, I'm here with you fine people online. So, without further ado, let's get this going. Now, I'm starting this off with an error message, but it's an error message I kind of want you to have. Now, if you look in the top left of my screen, you'll see some red text, and it's complaining that this project does not support atmospheric fog. Now, I'm starting it this way because I want you to know that there's a bunch of project settings that I've actually gone ahead of time and changed. And I've done this because, quite frankly, I want to make sure that when people go to use Unreal for large open worlds, that they're setting things up correctly. So I have gone through some rendering settings, and I have gone through, no, actually it's pretty much all the rendering settings. But I'll explain those as I get to them, and at the very end I'll do a very explicit walkthrough. But for the time being, the main thing I want any folks that are ever endeavoring to do this on their own to be aware of, I've disabled atmospheric fog, and I've enabled sky atmosphere, which should be on by default in the latest version of Unreal. In hindsight, I should have also disabled stationary skylight, but we've gone too far. Just turning these off will reduce the amount of time it takes for the engine to build materials and build shaders. So having these settings is pretty important. The other major one I just want to call out now before we go into anything else is I've actually gone and in the engine I've turned off, see the setting here that says allow static lighting? I've just nuked it. I didn't want any static lighting because we're doing a large outdoor environment. I don't want to be baking any lighting. It's just not something I can really reasonably afford to use up extra time. So it's worth noting that when you disable static lighting, if the engine explicitly knows that that is turned off, and it's not just you putting in dynamic lights for that particular scene, there is a bit of a performance boost in doing so, and some stuff does change under the hood. So if you're not using baked lighting for your project, turn it off. Like, don't just not use static lights. Straight up, make sure it's turned off. I can't stress that one enough. So, let's do this. I'm going to go File, and I'm going to go New Level, and once again, I'm going to start from an empty level, okay? Now, for this project, we're going to be using a lot of what we call landscapes. So I'm going to select Modes, and I'm going to go to Landscape. Now, if you want, you can also just hit Shift-2 and switch to it. Now, one of the things I'm going to be doing for this is I'm going to enable this setting called Enable Edit Landscape Layers. Okay, I'm just going to make sure that one's turned on. Now, if I zoom out in this early stage, you can see that we have the landscape environment in front of us. By the way, just as a quick aside before I continue, if anyone that's on the channel has not made any previous sessions and wants me to step through some of the camera controls as I'm doing this, please let me know. I spent the last session kind of going through some of those camera controls as I did, but I know we may have some newcomers that were only able to make the evening session. So if that's important to you, please make sure you flag that you would appreciate it in the YouTube chat, and I'm more than happy to make sure I do some call outs on that front. As I said, with this kind of environment in front of us, this is what we're going to be using to craft a large space. Okay, now there's a lot of settings I could be using straight out of the bat to kind of increase the size of the environment that we're going for, but I want something that is I'm just going to go the defaults out of the box, to be honest, because I want something that's kind of not too big, not too small, enough to demonstrate the point, but enough that I'm definitely not taking any performance hit, so we can still teach, but optimally. So I'm just going to keep these this mostly default. If you are ever doing this for yourself though, and you're interested on a technical level, the brighter squares represent the components, and then you have within that this higher fidelity. These bright squares kind of represent how culling works in the engine. So if you can't see any of that square, that entire chunk is just no longer accounted for. So I'm just kind of, if you're looking to do this in an optimal way down the track, the section size and sections per component do matter for performance reasons if you're really trying to squeeze every frame out. And I would suggest consulting the documentation for the best guides on how to approach that problem. Okay. Now, I'm moving through the world with right click, and as I hold down right click, I'm using W, A, S, and D to kind of shift around. In this situation, I'm just going to go over here, and I'm going to select Create. Now, when I've hit Create, you can see that we have something in front of us, and this is an absolute, like bare bones space. But I want you to watch what happens if I, with Sculpt selected, if I hold down left click and move it across. Now, it may be kind of tricky to see because right now we have no lighting, but if I go into wireframe mode, you can see what's happening. So as I was painting, I'm kind of painting directly, like height data, straight into the world. Now, that kind of begs for the first thing to kind of go on here, which is I'm going to always, whenever I'm creating an environment that's outdoors, the first thing I hit is I make sure that we have lighting and we have some ability to really genuinely detect depth inside of this environment. So straight out of the gate, I'm going to make sure that I have a few things. The first thing that I'm going to add is going to be a directional light. Now, if I add that in, we can now see that we have this going on. And already this is much easier to see what's going on. So like, you know, when I'm back in landscape painting and I'm just drawing stuff, we can immediately see what's actually happening there. So that's a good start. Now, just because I want to stay on top of things, I'm going to select my directional light and I'm going to hit F2 and I'm going to rename it to Sun, just because I know that this directional light will always represent the sun for me. Okay. Now the next thing I'm going to add, because again, I want to make sure I have real visibility into this, is I'm going to add a sky atmosphere. So when I add a sky atmosphere, we're not immediately going to see anything, because the sky atmosphere, it creates an atmospheric setup for your world, but it relies on knowing where the sun is. So I'm going to select the directional light that we created before, the sun, and I'm going to look for a setting inside of it called Atmosphere Fog Sunlight. And now the second I turn it on, we're going to get this. Now the cool thing with having this is if I was to rotate this light, it's actually going to represent the atmospheric conditions based on that. So a nice way to handle that is Control L on your keyboard will always grab the dominant light in your scene that has been set up as like index 0. And if I hold down Control L, you can see that I can then just move the mouse around to kind of get the environment to do something that I like. Okay, so having this kind of setup is useful. I've got this kind of light where maybe I want to get it there or something like that. Now, because again this is going fully dynamic, I'm just going to make sure that this the light itself has been set to movable. So we can see that we have something kind of nice going on for this early stage. I might eventually end up with that, but you know what, actually now that I think about it, I'm going to put it a little further up into the sky so we can see what's going on. Now the last thing I want to show you about the sky atmosphere that's just worth noting, that is, in my opinion, pretty cool, is the sky atmosphere looks like this because it's actually calculating what the light should look like inside the atmosphere. Now what that also means is that if I wanted to, and I sped up the camera, and I moved upwards at an incredible speed, the sky atmosphere actually accurately represents the atmosphere at any point. And one of the great things coming in the next version of Unreal Engine is we have a full cloud system that is calculated too on top of that. So you can just drop clouds in and they correctly work with the the atmospheric conditions and such, and they look gorgeous, to be honest. So I'm just going to dial my camera speed back down. Now, for anyone that is following along, one thing that I personally like to do is I like to make sure that when I'm using my camera, the default speed is reasonably low. And what I like to do is scroll up while moving to increase or decrease my speed. So I'm going to have this to there. And if I scroll up, my camera speed will increase. And if I scroll down, my camera speed will decrease. I personally find this helps a lot in terms of making sure that you have some control. Because if I scroll up, I can shoot across the landscape at high speed. And then when I get close to what I want and I hold right click and scroll down, I can then move at a kind of glacial pace. But this means I can focus more readily on certain parts of the environment. So we've got this going, that's all set up. The next thing that I'm going to add, again, to just make sure that I have nice visibility of the environment, is I'm going to set up an exponential height fog. So I'm just dropping that into the scene. So now we've got some just general kind of distance fog being calculated. The one thing that's worth doing, if you've got the ability to handle it, is enabling volumetric fog. It just looks that little bit nicer, and I'll show you how that works a little bit later on. But I'm kind of just running through this and just setting things up. So, and there's nothing wrong with you kind of dialing back that fog a little bit, but I personally like being able to just see that little bit of fog coming in on here. Okay, now the very last thing that I need to add, so right now we have the sky atmosphere, the sun, and the exponential height fog. The last thing I'm going to add to my scene to just make sure I have something I can work with is a skylight. And I'm going to make sure the skylight is also set to movable, which will be useful down the track for distance field generation. And I'll go through that a little bit later. So we've got this going. And we can see that this is like generally something that's a little bit easy to work with. So it's time for us to really paint out the environment to be what we want it to be. So we can see here that I'm able to use the standard brush tools. Okay, so I can go through here and I can paint into the environment, basically become a nice digital Bob Ross, kind of go through things. We can add some happy little mountains, and you know, at any point we can go through some of these and we can use other tools, right? So I could use flatten to carve out certain regions, or I could use the erosion brush to kind of carve this away, and that generally looks kind of cool. So we're coming through. So yeah, it generally looks kind of cool, and you can see that we're kind of getting things done. But it's worth noting that there is another approach that a lot of folks are unfamiliar with in creating your landscapes, okay? And that other approach is to actually use what is called landmass or blueprint brushes. So this is really cool. It's a pretty new feature, so I'll be honest with you, it's not entirely stable. I'm going to save the map before I continue because I just said that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select this button that says, I'm going to select this button that says Blueprint. Now, before I do what I'm about to do, I want to point out that if you want to do this, you'll need to turn it on in your plugins section. So in my plugins, I have enabled a thing called landmass. Okay? Now, here's how landmass works. I painted in the environment very quickly, right? But what's great is that if I use landmass, I'm going to create a new layer to save this onto. I'm just going to call this, layer mountains. And watch how this works. If I left click, and I want to paint a landmass, so I'm setting it to landmass, and then I left click, we get this triangle. Now, what this triangle actually represents is a mountain. So watch this. If I grab these, we're actually carving out a mountain with splines. And this is all being done through Blueprint. So a really cool thing is if you actually want to write your own algorithms for how this stuff should work, you can do so. You can do so using the like looking at the landmass code and writing your own Blueprint brushes. Someone's asked me how I enable the plugins. It's just edit plugins. Now here's the cool part. So we've got this landscape, this landmass brush, and I'm able to pick it up and drop it down. It's a good idea to cap your shape. So we've now kind of got this plateau. But what's really great is, you can run all sorts of stuff over this. For instance, I could get this. So I could get this and I could scroll down and say, hey, I want to, what would be a good example here? Maybe I want to run some curl noise. So at the moment, this is purely hugging the rim that I've set up there. But what if we had a curl noise of 0.5? So this kind of adds random into the breakdown. If I added more curl noise, like lay it over the top at a different level, we could kind of stack these things together to end up with a slightly more realistic looking mountain. And the cool part is I could then go through and I could say, hey, wouldn't it be great if I had some displacement? So displacement runs this texture, or whichever texture you choose to have, and automatically generates that layer of noise. Do you see that layer of noise that's kind of popping up there? So having that layer of noise just kind of creates, again, like a bit of a more realistic structure. Now, the cool thing is that like if I have this selected, and let's say, I want to pull this down instead, I want this to be more like a plateau or something, I can actually just alt drag and clone this and have multiple landmass sections just doing whatever I want to have them doing. And if I was to grab this at any point, I could be like, nah, I want this to actually come out to here. I want this to be more here. Maybe I want to alt drag out a point and kind of create another bit of a rim here. I'm going to get this mountain, and maybe this one's going to have a slightly different setup. Maybe we're going to do something cool with it. And if you want to as well, you can actually make landmass automatically paint your landscape as well, which is really cool. So you actually can tell like landmass to automatically paint snow at the top of this area, or I could tell it to paint dirt into a region, or whatever else I need to. And I bring this up because a lot of folks come into Unreal and they're like, well, I guess I better use some sort of world generation machine to get this stuff going. And those tools are great. But the problem is a lot of those tools are kind of made to be static. They're made to be exported and brought in. And what happens if I go ahead and I add a mountain that I'm super proud of and I think everything's fine, and then all of a sudden someone is like, actually, this base is now, it no longer exists, so we have to get rid of it. Well, great. I can now just turn it off, or I can turn it on again. What if someone's like, actually, we need to raise the elevation, or we need to do something else? So it's having this ability to just dynamically change it. I'm not, just being able to look at this. If I was, if the DP looks at this and they're like, it's great and all, but we need to set this up in a slightly different way. It's great being able to move a mountain by clicking and dragging, and that's pretty self-explanatory, I hope. So, you can see where this is going. This is a really useful system for kind of building your environments. You can immediately get some really nice visuals. And there's a couple of different landmass brushes that you can potentially be using. Like I used this one just here for the overall like mountains and this kind of weird valley section. But there's nothing that stops me from also adding, say, a material only. So if I add a material only and I click, material only just runs essentially a noise pass over everything. So I can get this and I can say, hey, I want to have less noise, so we can drop it back. Or I could say, hey, I want to have more noise. And I could even tell it to, paint that in to a certain level. And I can control how much tiling is going on with that noise. So if I want this to tile 4 times, we end up with this abomination. But if I tell it to be 0.1, we get some kind of slightly nicer, more natural noise. And it's up to you how you want to handle this and what kind of variations you want in your landscape. But I personally recommend considering something like this because, just straight out of the gate, we can focus on what actually matters. We can focus on just getting the scene right, or we can focus on getting the game right, or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve in a real-time engine. So we've got this set up, and the cool thing is I can still go beyond this, right? I can create another layer on top of it and call this, I'm just going to call this touch-ups. And when I've got this touch-ups layer, I could go to my flatten tool. And let's say I wanted to get my touch-ups layer, and I just wanted to move this section out. And I want to clean this up and do whatever it is I need to have done. Now, the fun part of this is that, again, if someone's like, I hate your touch-ups, and you're like, okay, you can turn it off by just selecting here. So, I can at any point kind of disable these layers and set things up. Now, if you don't see blueprint brushes, you may need to go back to your main mode for a second and then re-enable landscapes one time. It seems 4.25 can sometimes get a little touchy on that one. Anyway, so this is all up, this is all running. So actually, to answer that YouTube question as well, the other thing you may want to check is that you have enable edit layers enabled on your landscape itself. Anyway, so we've got this going, and we can see hopefully why this is kind of useful. I'm actually going to clear the sculpt that was on this layer. We can see why this is generally kind of useful, and why this is pretty powerful stuff. But what I would like to do from here is start looking at creating a material. So I want to make this surface of this landscape something that I can actually paint. I want to have something that I can see dirt and I can see grass, and I want it to look good. So how do we do this? So I've got a couple of people in YouTube saying I'm moving very quickly. I'm very sorry. Part of the problem with me teaching landscapes and environments is I get really excited about them, and I'm like, here we go, make a mountain. And every now and then I feel like I'm redoing that how to draw an owl tutorial online. So my apologies that I am going a little quick. If you have any questions though, please let me know. You're welcome to raise those questions inside the chat. Alex is there as well. He's been obviously posting some links for more documentation and such. But I am here to help. So please let me know if you do have any questions, and we'll keep going. I'm just trying to make as much of the world as I can. So we've kind of got this going, and we can see that's it's reasonably good. So the next thing that I want to do is have a material. Someone's talking about happy little trees. That's it's Tony. Yeah, that's it. So I just realized I've had my camera on this whole time. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. There we go. So we've got this going on. What I would like to do next is I would like to have a material. So it's worth noting that I've already imported some assets into my project. Now these are free assets. I've actually taken the liberty of down-resing them all to 2048s because they're like 8K textures when we give them out to people. These were assets that we used in the, I want to say 2015 Boy and His Kite demo. And these are just free assets. They're reasonably clean, and they're useful for something like this, but I kind of want to use them so I can kind of get in on some of these textures and such. And I'm going to be using them for my landscape. So I just want you to be aware that, that's where I pulled this stuff from, and it's not some super secret, hey, it's only Epic that can throw these things in. And I'm going to call this m_simple landscape. Great. Now, this is going to be my landscape material. Okay, so here's how this works. To begin with, I'm going to paint this in the ugliest of fashions. And I'm going to put in a color that is green. And I'm going to put in another color that is, let's go like a brown. that's a terrible brown. I'm getting too picky. There we go. So I've just dropped in 2 arbitrary colors for the sake of building this. Now to add these colors, if you are ever following on yourself, you can either add what's called a vector parameter, which adds a color like that, or you can add what's called a constant 3 vector. These are both ways to do the same thing. The difference is this one is something that is like a dynamic variable, and this one is just a set color that can never be changed, like at runtime. So it's up to you how you want to do it. But I'm adding those nodes because I want to make this represent grass and this one representing dirt for just a little bit. Now, what's really great is there's a thing inside of Unreal called a landscape layer blend. And if I add that node, by default, it looks like it's not doing anything. It's kind of confusing. But if I click this add, I can add a layer. And I'm going to call this layer grass. I can add another layer. And I can call this layer dirt. And the cool thing is, by having this kind of set up like this, Unreal goes ahead and it allows me to then use those as landscape setup. So what I mean by that is if I go back to my landscape and I set the material to be the simple landscape that I just made, immediately everything is black. And that's going to look confusing, but I'll explain why in just a moment. I'm going to go to my landscape, and this time instead of going to sculpt, I'm going to go to paint. And the cool thing is you can see that grass and dirt are just there. Okay? Now, the great thing here, someone asked which landscape nodes I used. I used landscape layer blend. So the great thing is here is I can actually add, I can add these to my world. Now, whenever you create a layer, you need to create an additional asset that tells it how weight is blended. So I'm just going to click, and literally just hit OK. So add, make it a weight blended layer, hit OK. And now how this works is reasonably straightforward. I can now select a layer. So let's say I wanted to paint dirt into the world, and I can hold left click, and I can just paint that in. And the first time 2 materials are ever used in combination, if they've never been used before, Unreal builds a permutation of the landscape material that supports those 2 being used together. So it actually kind of keeps like an efficient version of this material at the same, like together. This is really, really useful because we can kind of just paint stuff straight in. So I've got some dirt in there, but what would happen if we wanted to make this prettier than what we have right now? Now, the thing is this is where a lot of people start to go wrong. Because what they would think to themselves is they would be like, okay, well, I want this to look prettier. So I guess I'm now going to add a texture, and I'm going to make it some sort of, I need a texture of some sort. You know, they might be like, okay, I'm going to get this tiling leaf path, okay? And they might think to themselves, okay, I'm going to set this tiling leaf path as my texture, and they think to themselves, all right, I'm just going to plug that in, and you can do that, okay? And I'm not saying that you can't. However, it's going to look pretty ugly out of the bat, and it's going to create a lot more work for you in the long run if you're doing something like this. So I've had the question of what about adding negative geo like we saw in the interior environment session? That's a great question. If you want to add negative geometry, you actually can just, in your landscape brush, you can use the visibility layer, and you can just paint holes inside of this geometry. So wherever you paint a hole, you then mesh you then kind of mesh a cave behind the hole that you just painted in. Because whenever you paint a hole, it also removes collision for that region. So I was just answering that question. So I needed the hand gestures to feel like I had really properly answered that question. The reason I was saying that this is the wrong way to go about it is because when you're creating landscapes, what you need to consider doing here is instead of blending grass coloring and dirt coloring, you need to think about creating materials that are being blended with each other instead. And this is a really, really cool feature inside of the engine. Because what I could do is, instead of saying that layer grass and layer dirt are just colors being plugged in, and this is being plugged into here, Unreal has a feature that allows you to have entire materials as an input pin. And what that means is I can set up I'm going to use this node, even though it's not the most efficient way to do it. But I can actually just create entire materials that then just get blended together. And what that means is I could tell it, all right, so this is what the dirt looks like, but let's go grab some of the other things. This is what the dirt's normal map looks like. And I'll plug in the normal map. And I can say to it, do we have the roughness is in the alpha channel of this one? So I could say, hey, this is what the roughness pass looks like. Now, what this actually means is, if I preview this node, I'm actually creating an entire material inside of this node. And instead of blending colors together, it's actually blending kind of the final result of what those materials would look like. And that's where this is really, really powerful, because what I'm essentially able to do is now create little biomes individually and then blend them together, instead of having, because what a lot of people would have done is they would have had a landscape layer blend for color, and a landscape layer blend for roughness, and a landscape layer blend for normals, and it just gets out of hand. It's not ideal. So someone said, is there a huge performance hit to blending materials instead of colors? There's not. So one of the great things that you can do to answer that question is if you call set material attributes, so I called make material attributes. Set material attributes lets you individually add the pins that are actually there. So I know I need base color, roughness, and normal. So I can actually manually add base color, roughness, and normal. And by only having those channels in, it does a pretty good job of saying I only need to blend these specific things. This is the data that's actually important. So I'm just going to quickly set up some sort of grass so that we can see this in action. I'm hoping there's a grass texture that works. Yeah.
I'll also add on to the landscape layer stuff. So with weight maps, to answer Claude's question about is there a huge performance hit to blending materials instead of colors, it's not much. The thing is that each landscape component will actually compile its own subversion of that material that Chris is making. So if you only use 2 weight maps on that material, it'll only compile down those 2 weight maps in the material. So that kind of makes sense. So that means you save memory on the shader side and also computation.
Alex's mic is really loud for me, and it kind of it scares me when he comes in. All right, so we've started to paint this in, and I can now see that we're blending from dirt to grass. Okay, so it's starting to look better in one way, but it still looks pretty ugly right now, and I would never want to show this to a customer. So how do we fix that? Well, we want to remove the tiling. Now, see, I'm hoping that stands out to everybody, but essentially what's happening here is the textures are just tiling over and over and over and over again. You can see that this bit of green is this bit of green and this bit of green. You know, they're just being multiplied again and again and again. So we've got this kind of coming in, and if I want to make this bigger or smaller, I can actually just change the UVs, and I can do that with what's called landscape layer coordinates. And I can set those values to whatever I feel like. Now the cool thing here is if I turn these up, we can see what this looks like. Give it just a second. By the way, for the record, outdoor environments hit your... They require the most shader compilations of any other task. So that started to improve things a little bit, and you can kind of see what's going on here. So I'm able to now, again, just kind of go straight in here and go to my paint tools. And if I wanted more dirt here, perhaps with less of a fall off, these all got changed recently, so I'm not quite used to the new controls. So with less of a fall off, I could paint that hard edge of dirt just right into it and just set this up to however I needed it. In hindsight, I should have done this the other way. So I think I might make the world dirt and then paint grass into it. Yeah, that's a good move. So I'm actually just going to really quickly undo my hard work, and I'm just going to right click and say fill. And this should fill the world with dirt, which is a strange sentence out loud. And then I'm going to go to grass, and I'm just going to paint grass into a few regions. So if we were to paint grass into here, and again, I could be painting this in with landscapes if I chose to. So you actually can select these and tell them to paint inside of their region. I'm not going to be doing that because it's a little finicky to get right, and I don't want to do that on the live stream. So instead, I'm just going to speed Bob Ross this whole thing. By the way, I keep changing the size of the brushes. How I'm doing that is with the square brackets on your keyboard. So it's the same as Photoshop to kind of just change those sizes. Okay. Cool. Great. Ship it. Now, we've started to get, some sort of environment in there. It's starting to feel okay. The next thing that I would like to do though is I would really like to resolve some of what we're seeing here with this tiling that's going on. The tiling that's occurring, like we improved it a bit, but at the end of the day, it still needs a little bit of love, right? So how do we go about doing this? Well, here's a really cool thing that you could do. It's up to you how you want to approach this problem, but one of the cool things that you could do is you can, if you wanted to, I could get this grass material and duplicate it. Now I know that sounds really strange, but what if we made one grass material that was good from afar, but far from good, and we made another one that's better up close? So we had this one with a scale that was like a really big number. I might even go higher. Let's try 14. And this one, which has the scale as a lower number. So if we were to preview it, we're going to have one of them that when we examine it is up close, probably going to be really nasty. And if I go to this one, up close, it's going to be a whole lot better. Okay. So what we could do is I could actually add both of those in, and I could literally material layer blend. Sorry, it's called blend attributes, blend material attributes. I can actually, if I want to, set up a blend that blends those two materials together into one another. And all I need to really do to do something like that is I need to find out how far away something is. Hopefully this will make sense in just a minute. But and I know I am dropping people a little bit in the deep end here, but I hope you'll understand the importance in just a moment. Anytime we look at a pixel, we're seeing color, right? But color itself is really just data. And what that means we can do is if we wanted to look at the world position of any pixel, it'll actually show it to us as a color. I know that seems strange, but because in Unreal the z-axis is blue, as things go up, it's getting bluer. And as things, because the x-axis is red, as if it goes down there, it's redder, and green, greener. So the cool thing is we can actually get the distance from the position to the camera position. We can find out how far that is, and if we wanted to, we could blend over time. Now that's the math for anyone that's interested in what I'm doing here. But if I was to look at this, when I'm up close, it's now a value of 0. And as I move further away, it approaches a value of 1. Because the distance, when the distance from the position that we're looking at to my camera is, I don't know, 100, it's going to be 100 divided by 2000. Whereas when I'm 20 meters away, it'll be 2000 divided by 2000 and a value of 1. Now there is actually a value that is called distance blend. So if you want to, you can just plug that node in. So I'm showing you I showed you the math, but so if you look at this now, notice that as I move, it's now switching between, I'm not sure if the stream's illustrating that particularly well, but what I'm actually doing is telling it, hey, when I'm this far, I do this, and when I'm this far, I do this. So under the hood, I showed you the math first, but there is just a single node to do this. And the cool thing is you can say, all right, I want the blend range to be a value of, I don't know, 1000. And I want the starting range to be a value, so to not happen for the first negative 2000. And if you look at what happens now, it may be a little tricky to see on that screen, but if I apply this, you should see this in the world. So like I said, it's this, I know that sounded complex, but conceptually we made big grass and we made little grass, and we blended when it was appropriate to blend between those grasses. I have a suspicion that my grass is backwards, and we're about to find out. So there's the grass. Okay, I totally have everything backwards. You can see it blending, but it's definitely backwards. So I'm going to set this one to 4 and this one to 14. My apologies, everybody. But what we've kind of done here is we've kind of set up this blend setup, and now it's just going to do its thing. Give it just a second. So notice that if we're looking for it, we see it, right? You know, if I'm really staring for it, we can see that blend happening. But if I was to look at this landscape, it's going to be much harder to see that tiling kicking in. So hopefully that kind of illustrates what I'm talking about and why that's pretty useful. If I was to do this slightly nicer, I would change the blend range to a larger value so it's a little less noticeable, and I'd probably do it a little sooner. But yeah, so that's kind of one early point that I just wanted to make sure folks were aware of when they're setting this kind of stuff up, because it only requires that little bit of extra technical knowledge to really push something from being, oh hey, this was clean and it looked okay, to being that next step above that people are going to be a lot happier with. So we've now got grass that blends far more nicely. The next thing that I would like to do is I would like my grass to actually look particularly good. We've had someone say that their project is getting stuck loading. Jack, by any chance, was that after you changed shaders? 39% is where shaders for the engine kick in. So if you've changed your settings, it will take a couple of minutes to recompile the shaders under the hood the first time. So that could be what's causing what you're seeing. Someone in the comments just said that they're really digging the landscape tools, and I'm not sure if it was a pun or not. So anyway, we've got this going. We have our basic environment. But the next thing that I would love to do for this kind of situation is I would love for my grass to look like grass, because this is not particularly pretty. Okay, so how do we do that? Now, for anyone that was in my previous session, you're probably familiar with the foliage tool that I showed off before. So you may be thinking to yourself, well, I guess we're going to go to the foliage mode, and we're just going to paint in some grass. Just drag that thing in, and that would be a way of approaching this. Oop, it's building shaders. Give it just a sec. That would be a way of approaching this problem. You could potentially paint grass into the scene, but that's not a good way to approach it, because I could do that and be like, there's grass now, but that's going to take so long. So what we want to actually do instead, is I'm going to go to here, and I'm going to tell this to paint my grass, which is cool, because what I can do is I can right click and say landscape grass output. And what happens is any value that gets read into here that is a value of 1 will now create whatever I tell it to create. And if the value is 0, it won't do anything. So what I can actually do is over here, we're sampling a landscape layer called grass. And if I want to, I can tell it to look for the value of the word grass. Okay. Now, the last little thing I need to do is tell it what grass to grow. So see, we've done this. It's asking me, what's the grass type? And what I need to do is create, under foliage, a grass type. And I'm going to call this generic grass. Someone asked if you should put Unreal on your SSD. Yes, 100%. If your SSD can fit the project, definitely do it. You will be happier for it. Okay, so we've got field grass. I've just added. I'm just going to use the defaults out of the box to see how it looks. But this time around, let's see what that looks like. Did I plug that in? I did not plug it in. I regret so much. Okay, now we're just going to have to give this a minute. Unfortunately, one of the little things that kicks in is if you hit compile on a material and then you realize that you made a mistake and you hit compile before the first one's built, it will still build the old material. So we're going to, this will just take 30 seconds or so. So if anyone has any questions, I might just jump through a few of them. Someone's asking why it needs so many tasks to shader compile. So this is building permutations for all of the different lighting conditions and all of the different fog conditions to kind of keep the overhead pretty low. So we use the graph, the material graph, as a way of basically handling all of the possible conditions that could have been there. All right, so this is what we got for doing that. And the cool part is, all right, so we started to get some grass in there from doing that, but this is now reactive to my environment. So if I was to paint in dirt, it gets rid of the grass. Okay. So we've started to get something a bit better. And it's time for me to kind of start really kind of handling some of these density values with how this stuff works. But like, see how much nicer that is when the engine just paints your grass for you? Because it's just, I can't be bothered doing that. One of the really nice things that you can do in the engine as well is you can use virtual textures so that the grass actually samples the color of the landscape beneath it. If we have time today, I'll try and run through it. But you actually can tell the grass to sample the color of the environment beneath it so that it blends really nicely into the environment. But if I go to my generic grass settings that we had a moment ago, I can control the density. I can control whether it's using a grid or whether it's not using a grid. I can control the distances where it starts to fade versus when it's up close. So I could say, hey, up close, let's have really dense, thick, gorgeous grass, and then as it scales away, I want it to start dropping. Drop away. Oh, that was too close. But like being able to kind of set this stuff up is just it's just really useful because you don't have to care. I know I say that a lot, but I really mean it. Like just being able to kind of let the tech do this stuff for you means that you can kind of focus on what really matters, because priorities. So we've got this in. We can now see that we have some reasonably pretty looking grass. Let's start looking at some other stuff that we could be doing. So the next thing that I think I might look at is foliage. So if as I said before, we have the foliage painting mode. And I can get any number of things that we have here, and I can paint them straight into the world. So if I grab these 3 bushes and I drag them into my foliage types, I'm going to decrease the density just a little bit, but nothing stops me from just painting these bushes straight into the world. We get a little bit of variation going straight out of the bat, and it's kind of cool. But what would be much cooler is if they planted themselves. So you can use the foliage tool for painting stuff into the world, but I'm personally a much bigger fan of telling the trees how to grow and letting them just distribute themselves accordingly. It ends up often quite a lot nicer. You can set up various rules, and I'll show you how to do that. So as I said, there's nothing wrong with doing what I just did and painting this in. It's just, if I have to handle a world that is even this large, it's just gonna take some time, So it's better to let those trees kind of do that themselves. So what I'm actually going to turn on is a experimental feature. So to do this yourselves, you'll need to go to Editor Preferences, and then go down to Experimental. Now I got to warn you, this is the part of the editor where when they used to make maps and they would just draw some dragons. This is that part of that. So I'm going to turn on procedural foliage. Okay, so it's enabled. And how this works is I'm going to set up some rules for how foliage can be created. Now there's a few different ways for how you can do what I'm about to do. It's up to you how you want to handle this, but this foliage that I painted into the world before, if you select it, it has a ton of different properties that are all here for the instance, for the placement, and for painting it in and the density values, etc., etc. But if you get this and click save, you can actually save the foliage asset out. So kind of save the rules of the foliage out, if you know what I mean. So I'm gonna go ahead and just do that really, really quickly. I'm gonna call this. Okay, so I'm just gonna do that real quick. So we've got this bush type. And what we actually have now is a little thing down here called procedural. And I could tell these bushes that they have a collision radius of 10 centimeters, maybe 20 centimeters. And they have a shade radius of 50 centimeters, or maybe when I go closer, 30 centimeters. This means that these bushes cast shade. Actually, in reality, that bush is tiny, so it doesn't really cast shade. You could mostly grow things around them without too much drama. So I'm going to have a very low shade radius. I can set this up for how quickly the seeds spread. And I could kind of set up anything that I really want to here. You can say, hey, can these bushes grow in the shade or not? I'm not sure if that will look cool or not. So I'm going to say yes for the time being, and we'll see what that looks like. And I'm also going to create a couple of other types of foliage. Okay, so you can also create foliage by going down to here and just creating foliage. So it's up to you whether you want to click the save button from in the engine like I showed you before or through here. But I'm going to create another one, which is going to be called tree 1 foliage. Again, we can open this up and I just need some sort of tree. Thankfully I have a couple, so I'm just going to get this Scots pine. I'm going to tell it that when it's growing, I'm going to say it has a collision radius of about 100, a shade radius of about 150. They don't spawn in the shade, but they can grow in the shade is what I'm going to say. They don't distribute that many seeds. And they grow from 0.5 times to 1.2 times their default height. Otherwise, we're going to end up with some gigantic trees, maybe 0.6. So this will actually kind of like control just like the spread of the tree size and such over time. And I'm going to duplicate that and make a tree 2. Judgment Day. Okay, so we've got the tree in there as well. Same settings. There's a bunch of other settings here that I've actually been kind of skipping over, but you can actually tell them as well to only be on surfaces within 45 degrees. So you can actually control the maximum ground angle that this tree could be on. Now that I think about it, 45 is probably going to look silly. We'll fix it afterwards, but you know, so I've created these foliage types, right? And I have no idea how this first version is going to work, but all you need to do to get one working is drop in a procedural foliage volume. So this one, I just dropped it into the scene. Make it as big as it needs to be to cover a region. For the time being, I'm just going to put one in this middle area, just because I'm a little paranoid about the fact that I'm running like OBS and Unreal and everything else at the same time. Like, part of me is just terrified about how that's going to turn out. And the last thing that it needs is procedural foliage volumes need to know a spawner. And again, that's pretty easy. I just right click, I create a spawner. I'm going to call this generic forest spawner. And the spawners contain the biomes. So you can be like, all right, I want the bushes, and I want the tree, and I want the other tree. Now that I think about it, I'm going to just super quickly do another bush as well. Okay, added. Everything's good. Where's my spawner? There's my spawner. I think that's the other one. All right. And we say, grow me a forest. Well, definitely grow me a forest. I may have been a little aggressive in the tree growth because now they're all casting shade. So we'll give this just a second to get through. I'm gonna go back to my tree settings, and I'm gonna say to these trees. I'm gonna go back to these trees, and I'm gonna say you can grow in the shade, but you can't spawn in the shade. I'm gonna set their radius of how much shade they cast to be a bit higher. To I'm going to go even higher for this one. So the reason it's compiling shaders is because these are instance meshes. It's generating like a batch method really quickly. Now I'm going to re-simulate the forest with those new rules, which should spread out some of those trees. And I'm going to increase collision. I'm actually going to turn off can grow in shade on the trees because that seems to be pretty aggressive. And I'm going to limit the number of seeds that they can distribute as well. Now, let's look a little bit better. But this is the 45-degree angle issue that I was talking about before. It's fine for bushes, but it's shocking for trees. Right, so again, in the trees, I'm going to say, hey, your max slope angle is 30 degrees. Actually, even 30 degrees is going to look silly for something like that, so I'm going to say 20. And for this Scots pine, maybe I can get away with a little bit. I can say 30 for that one's okay. And we'll resim it again. Great. So you can now see that's starting to work. Now this is still really got some problems. And the first of those problems is we need to tell these trees to use what is called distance field lighting. So by putting in the skylight before, we were telling and enabling a rendering setting that I have in my project settings. I've turned on a thing called generate mesh distance fields. By default, foliage doesn't affect it. But if you get these assets and you tell them to use distance fields, oh, by the way, one thing that I didn't point out before that you probably should know is once you paint these in this way, you can actually affect them. But anyway, once I add these to the world, if I enable this that says affect distance field lighting, my forest is now going to correctly actually shade. So like, see how much nicer that forest immediately looked? So one thing that's really cool about this is, so we've just grown a forest, right? And it looks semi-respectable, but one of the really great things is I know before you were probably like, yeah, but Chris, artists are really useful. Why would you want to do this procedurally? And you're right, artists are super useful and they're creative and they're amazing. But what I can actually do now is, let's say I wanted to change the bushes. I can now just unpaint those assets. You know what I mean? Like if they were like, no, but I need touch-ups here, I could be like, oh yeah, okay, let's touch that up and let's get rid of this. Or let's look at this tree, which is here, and just shift it a little bit. You know, so it's much nicer to kind of generate, in my opinion, it's much nicer to be able to procedurally just generate a forest and then let the artist kind of paint in and touch it up and work with it themselves, as opposed to just putting the entire burden on them of generating an entire forest. Like that just does not sound like a good time. You know, and this is reasonably performant. Like I'm doing this on my laptop and we're still sitting at 50 FPS while I'm streaming with, you know, without really optimizing a lot of these settings. We're getting this nice fog kind of coming in, because remember we set up the volumetric fog before, so we're getting some of that kind of coming in. Like I said, just doing your best to kind of give artists a break and letting them just kind of tweak stuff. It's really, really useful for your overall workflow for outdoor environments. So I can't stress that enough, that this is just, yeah, makes life a bit easier. So do we have any questions on the procedural stuff so far? I know I've gone through quite a lot of content already, but it's because just generally there's a lot of stuff here that I'd really love to be able to cover, and showing you the basics and giving you a rough idea of how to do it and kind of opening your mind as to what's possible, I think was one of the major goals for this talk for me. Like, if you know something is doable given enough time, I think you'll you know, and the fact that you can communicate with us and everything else, hopefully that saves a lot of time. So, yeah, any questions so far from anyone, or are we? What are the differences between using something like this and something like Brushify? Okay, so Brushify, for if it is what I'm thinking of, you're talking about the packs that were made by Joe Garth. They're on the marketplace. Um, so the to set up something like Brushify, what he's actually doing is essentially he's getting these landscape layers that he's made, but he's bringing in some additional rules that say this is when to paint in this thing procedurally. And by doing that way, you don't need to paint anything in at all, but it also means that you don't quite have as much control, in my opinion. I think Brushify is really great for just slapping a scene together like immediately, but for having fine-grained control, I would generally prefer personally to try and use landscape layer blending wherever I can. But the Brushify stuff is really great. He's done an excellent job. So like, you know, you can using that as a great base for what you're doing isn't a bad idea. But what I'm kind of trying to show here is that like you don't need marketplace assets to really get something incredible and get something up and running. It's worth noting as well that exposure is kicking in, my arch enemy. So like I should probably actually set up some nice exposure settings. There we go. That's actually pretty good. So I've kind of like, by default, the engine actually will have exposure that kicks in and does eye adaptation, which looks good, but you know, you don't always want eye adaptation. So if you lock the exposure like that, this is just a bit nicer to get a feeling for how everything's coming together. Someone said, how would something like snow work with this? I imagine it doesn't just paint the map white. So if you're wanting to do snow, that's a great question. There's a few ways you can approach that. What you can do in your landscape layer that works pretty well is when you make these landscapes, at the very end, after everything, I could then blend a snow layer onto the top of it. And I could have an additional value that is like a parameter that goes from 0 to 1 of like snowiness. And then the game, could, or the film or whatever it is that you're doing, if you want to create time, like a picture of time, can work that way. Someone said, can we set exposure on camera settings? If you want to do anything like that, you should do it through the cinematic camera, which you can place into the world. Oops, I'm still in. At which point you can then affect your lens, your exposure, and everything else can be done through a camera. So this is, if I was to look at this down here, this is what we're going to be going into when we're doing the sequencer work. But from here, I'm then able to set up what kind of film it is, what kind of color grading it's using. I can run through various settings on the camera, so I can be like, hey, this represents Super 8 or 16:9 or whatever we want to have. So you can do a lot of that stuff through this kind of camera setting instead, if you would prefer that approach. So we've kind of got the basics of a forest in play. There's been a couple of questions about how to handle water. So actually, before I go into water, I'm sorry, I'm a bit scatterbrained. It's been a long couple of days. I might actually keep answering the snow value. What I forgot to mention before is you can create what's called a material parameter collection. And a material parameter collection allows you to basically create global settings that every material can read. So if I was to get this, and I'm going to call this nature values, I can create a parameter called snow level, or amount of snow is better. And every single material that I work with can now access amount of snow as a value, like every single one in the entire engine. So what that actually would let you do is just create a one-time simple value that everything can just can kind of just access, and that's how to control some of those global variables. I bring this up because it's not just snow. This could be rain or anything else as well. Like you could actually just be having all of your materials becoming wet and your landscape and your foliage knows to do that. You know, those kind of things. And I think that's really powerful. So I just wanted to flag that as an additional way to go about changing certain things. Some of the other questions that have popped up. What have we got here? It's just discussions of rain. Okay, I'd say we're probably good to keep going on then. Oh wait, sorry. So in the materials, when some of the math about blending was from camera position, what do you do when there are multiple cameras? Often that's a situation where you start looking at using just high resolution textures for some of these things. Like I'm using 2048s. But typically in film and TV and high-end games, you would want to be looking at 8K textures for your landscapes. You've got to remember that when someone's sitting here, if what they're going to be seeing 90% of the time is this dirt, it's probably a good idea to make this dirt look really good and doing additional subtle blends that just vary it over time in different ways. I'm not going to cover that tonight because it's a bit of an in-depth topic, I think. What's next? Someone asked about the grass casting shadows. You can enable or disable that as you see through here. Up to you how you want to handle it. Cool. Okay, we'll move on to the next thing. The next topic for me to cover is Quixel. So I'm going to launch up Quixel. Give me one moment. All right. So this is Quixel Bridge. Now Quixel Bridge is completely free for Unreal Engine developers, and how it works is like this. Right now there are 13,178 assets, and let's say that what we needed was, I don't know, a rock. This is a bad search term. We want to search for a rock. We could then be like, hey, give me all 3D assets that are rocks. And we could look through all of these and find anything that we wanted to use. And we could kind of scroll through these. And let's say, we wanted the quarry cliff or something else. I'm going to see if I have any that are already downloaded. So these are random assets that I've already pulled down from Quixel. I like that one. Yeah, okay, let's go with that. So let's say we wanted to bring in this Icelandic rocky moss. We can just bring this rock straight into our project at will without any dramas. And this is like an incredibly useful suite. One thing I would want to point out here is that we have another tool called Quixel Mixer, and Quixel Mixer, again, you can use if you're an Unreal Engine dev, allows you to really quickly stylize a lot of these assets too. So it's super quick for you to be, it's super quick for you to kind of get these assets and fit them to your project, because you can redress them, you can you can mix the textures that are in the Megascans with other textures. You can work with these to whatever your heart desires, really. But I'm gonna bring this over to my project. So I'm just gonna grab this, and I'm gonna set my project, which is called something along the lines of Open World Workshop. Cool, so I've got that selected. I'm just going to say I want 2K textures. I'm going to tell it to grab the LOD2. There's a bunch of extra advanced settings that you can tell it, like how to pack channels, how you want certain data. And you can also set up like naming conventions, desired file formats, that kind of stuff. So yeah, we've got all those in place, and I'm just going to click on that and hit export. And now we give it a minute. And it's going to say exporting. Done. If I go back to Unreal, I'm now able to go to my content browser, get the rock, and drop that rock into play. Let's make it a bit bigger. Let's make it a bit smaller. All right, there we go. There we go. So like having this, now we wait. I'd say that's pretty quick. Thank you very much. So having something like this kind of just be able to immediately be like, okay, we're developing a, I don't know, let's say we need some castle assets. Being able to kind of just pull this stuff straight in, not really have to think about it. We can grab textures, we can grab, I mean, if we wanted to add like a sandy beach or something here to do some like ponds or something like that, that's super easy to do. We could just pull the sandy textures and such from Megascans. Like I'm looking through the 3D. Oh no, this is all. So I could find anything appropriate to these things. There's also a nice section called collections. And again, like I know I keep saying this, but it is free for Unreal Engine users. So I really want to flag it because I get a lot of people who are like, "What's the catch?" And the catch is we want you to make better stuff and have it look pretty, and this is a great way to do that. We want to have rich worlds that look gorgeous, so let's move through it. So we've got this these collections, as I was saying before, are like great ways for you to kind of look at different environments and what was used for various things. So I could go to this castle ruins and then just examine all of the assets that we used to create that, and fill it out. So anyway, I wanted to make sure folks were aware of that and that you were able to kind of leverage those things. The next thing for me to work on is, I think, I'm getting a bit of LOD popping on that. I'm not sure why. The next thing for me to go through actually is dithering. So here's the thing that drives me insane. So when you're looking at an asset, does everyone see that super quick like wave of assets? As I'm moving away, the next level of detail is just popping in. Everyone see what I'm talking about there? Like as I move away, it's just this wave of here's high quality, and you're like, it looks terrible when you do that. How to fix that? It's actually surprisingly easy. All you have to do is open up the material for any of these things. And look, this is a super complicated material for the grass, but I'm actually not going to focus on most of it. All I'm going to do is type in the word dith, and you'll see that we have an option that says dither LOD transitions. Turn that on. And what this will now do is it will now fade from one to the other. Cool, give it just a sec. Give it just a minute. All right. So what this actually does is it adds a couple of extra instructions, but behold, it still changes, but it's way less aggressive. Everything is better for it, and you can do the same thing with everything else. If I was to look for that myrtle bush, that's the foliage type. That's the thing. Find your parent. So I could just open up all of these and say, I want you to dither as well. And the froms, tell them to dither. And you should now be able to just see these things kind of cool. And now when we fade away from the bushes, they're fading between LODs as well. Still getting a bit of a bright light on some of these assets, so I suspect these ones may not have been set up. Oh, I know what's going on next. Okay, cool. So the next thing we're getting is this really bright light that's kicking in on some of these assets. I think what we're seeing is some of the settings in our directional light. If you'll give me just one moment to quickly check this. I suspect that's what we're seeing. All right. So, okay. So what we're seeing here is our cascade. So when you're, sorry, I'm just gonna try to find a nice way to show you this off. When we're looking at an environment and we're rendering its shadows, we have two ways to go about rendering it. Okay, one of them is the cascaded shadow maps. Now, if I drop this, and I'm going to turn this off as well. If you look at this shadow and watch as I increase it, what's actually happening here is we have two ways of casting shadows, and that method that we're using for casting the shadow is cascaded shadow maps are like a very crisp shadow. They look really good up close, and you get like a lot more detail on some of these things. But at a distance, we switch over to using ray trace distance field shadows, which is what we're seeing for here. Now, for something like this, what we're encountering, actually, and I can show you this. Visualize, no. Visualize. All right. So the game engine automatically makes this mesh that you see in front of us here. Okay. And this is like a super, like low resolution version of everything in the world. Okay. And these are called distance fields. Now, distance fields, are what allow us to have this really, really long distance like views for what we see, because at a distance, instead of having like super high resolution shadows that are being cast and having to trace against everything, what we're actually seeing here is it's only casting shadows against these kind of like this distance blob version of everything. So, and to view that, you know, I've turned on this visualize global distance fields. But if you know that, then that's what actually should help you understand what's going on with some of the strange lighting that we're seeing on some of the distance LODs. These ones here are billboards, and they're not quite picking up the distance fields as they should be. You can fix that in the meshes themselves by assigning what's called a mesh proxy, and that should fix it. But I don't think I have one readily available, so my apologies. But I think if we change the distance between when it's distance field shadows versus when it's cascaded shadows, we should have a better result on that front. Cool. So we've got this running. Are there any particular topics that folks want to see before I before I move on to the next topic? Had one of the questions came up was, can the trees not be aligned to the surface? Yeah, that's no problem at all. Under the settings for any of these things, there's a align to normal. If you turn that off, the tree will no longer align itself to the vertical. You can also do align max angle, so you can tell it to align to the normal but not go beyond a certain value, so it still does some alignment but not a huge amount. One thing that I want to mention to any of the folks that do have like programmers handy, this engine, all of the source code is readily available. So if you do have some large scale systems that you want to make for your world, like let's say you wanted to make a procedural city system and you wanted to leverage some of the existing controls and logic in the procedural foliage system, nothing stops you from opening up the code that we have for that and just examining how it's done and then using that for your own projects. So please please keep that one in mind. Great. So the next thing I want to touch on here is going to be water, and I'm only going to touch on this loosely because it's worth noting that the next build of Unreal is going to have a much nicer water system. So what I think would be a great thing for us to touch on is just the idea of what water is in a real-time engine when you're doing simpler water planes, especially. A lot of people kind of get afraid of some of these things, but it's reasonably easy to set up, and that is I'm just going to create a thing called m underscore water simple. Now, this used to be a lot more complicated than what I'm about to show you. Fortunately, if you want to take the really easy way of adding water, one of the things that I didn't show you before is that landmass has a system built into it for putting down rivers. So if I was to go to here and I wanted to create a new layer that was called rivers, I can comfortably go to here and add a landmass river that I can then use to kind of put things up. I have to set up all the settings properly, but this is the kind of stuff that you're going to see kind of coming down in the future. But this water material that it's using is actually a really good starting place if you ever want to make your own oops, some trick. I meant to delete the layer. If you ever want to make your own systems. Someone said, will the next version of the engine incorporate water physics like Gerstner wave logic? I believe so. There's more information available from the recent talk that popped up in the Unreal Fest online. So if Alex could drop that in the chat, you're more than welcome to check that out after this one. So what I was going to say was there is already a river material that is actually a really, really useful starting point for if you're examining how to do some of this stuff. And honestly, the most useful part that it has is this bit here, which is we have a new thing that's been brought in called single layer water, and we use this in our own projects. And single layer water allows you to set a scattering coefficient and an absorption coefficient as well as a phase to kind of simulate the properties of water reasonably simply. So I'm going to cheat, and under here I'm literally going to say make this single layer water. And I'm just going to copy and paste that little setting. Because again, you can rip this out yourself. This simple river is available in the landmass content. So if you open up the landmass content, you can examine this little setup. But this setup of what we have like right there, I can now tell this to be, oh, sorry, no, it's an opaque. So again, like if you want to pull from any of this stuff, all you need to do is grab this section down here to get the core. The other useful part actually is refraction. So watch what this does. I've got this. I'm going to set the opacity to 0. Oops, sorry. And that's the start of us having water. So I'm going to hit save. This is just going to be a very, very simple water. But I want you to get an idea of how you can start to put some of these things into your scene. And I'm going to select the one that we made, water simple. And in the world, I need some nice place to put a lake. Sorry, folks, one sec. Great. Just creating a lake. Cool. This will be my lake. Don't ask why there's a lake up here. We're just acknowledging that there is and moving on. Great. Now I'm going to drop in a plane. By the way, one thing I haven't ever mentioned is that you can hit F to focus on the object that's currently selected. And I'm going to set this to big. Just in case. Cool. And I'm going to get the water. And I'm going to set the material to just be simple water. Now this is the I'm actually going to turn the exposure settings back on because the opposite is happening right now. In fact, maybe I should just flood the forest that we have down here. Maybe that would look cooler. Yeah, we'll go with this one. Cool. So I'm just going to get this and crank it up. Just because this way we have some stuff beneath it. Cool. Great. So you can kind of see what's going on there. Now, the great thing here is you actually can control how the scattering is going on. You can control how the absorption is working. So you can kind of really steer this into like the settings that you want. But what we might want to do on top, and this is one of the really nice things, is so at the moment this is perfectly still water, which doesn't look particularly great. But one thing that you can do is if you add some sort of texture for, let's see if I have any water normals. So I already do have some kite demo water normals. So a normal map controls the reflection angle of a surface. So basically it says which way something points. For something like this, if I was to drag this in, and just plug that in, give it just a second, you can see that it's made the surface do that. One of the really nice sorry. Oh, that's interesting. It's hidden by default. So one of the really nice things that you can do is we actually have a function in the engine that is apparently hidden by default for some reason, but it's called motion four-way chaos normal. And what this node lets you do is literally read in a texture and it will create like a chaotic version of that texture. So in this case, I'm going to get this. Now you can't plug this in because this wants a texture and this is giving it red, green, and blue. So you need to convert this to what's called a texture object. And that now passes a reference to the texture through to this function. But if we plug this in, not sure how well that's coming through. Now that's now creating chaotic normals. And if I was to hit apply, now this won't work immediately because we now have a different issue. The water plane that I made is so big that we can't see the normals because they're just so gigantic over the surface. To fix that is reasonably simple. There's a thing that we have called world position XY, and a world position XY basically says instead of using the UVs of the plane, just instead use the position in the world to kind of determine where something is. I know that wasn't a great way of explaining that, but hopefully when I hit apply, you'll see what that means. I think the scale is going to be too small to begin with, but it should still illustrate the point. There you go. So see how we're starting to kind of get some of these kind of coming through reasonably cleanly as the start. You know, and obviously this was like 10 seconds of work, so this is the early point of where you would go. but you would then control the rest of it from there. Okay. Cool. So next topic to handle. How are we doing for time at the moment?
You're about an hour and a half in.
Hour and a half in. Okay. If we're an hour and a half in, I can go a little bit longer. There's a topic that I'm going to cover here called it's called runtime virtual textures, and we're getting some weird black coming in on this mesh. I'm not quite sure what's causing that. I think it might be distance fields. I think I might need to increase the resolution of this asset. I'll work it out later. So one thing that I would like to touch on next then is, we'll touch runtime virtual textures. Now, what I would like to do is see this. That's something I would really like to remove. I kind of hate it when you can really see obvious blending. So like you'll notice that even when this asset is touching the ground, like, and kind of tucked away reasonably nicely, we're still seeing this like hard edge. And I know I'm really zeroing in on this, but it's not ideal, right? So the question comes of like, well, how do we fix something like this that's clearly failing the whole project? What can we do? And what I would actually recommend doing here is using a technique called runtime virtual textures. And I mentioned them before, but I haven't really gone into them just yet. And how they work is this. What we can do is, under the hood, the first time we ever render a pixel, we can actually store the value of that pixel. We can store the value of that pixel into a texture, and anything can look up that texture. So what we can actually do is we can say to the engine, hey, I want you to get this piece of information, this is dirt and this is what it looks like, here's where it is. But then any other asset in the engine is able to say, hey, what's the color of the dirt that's beneath me? And they look up that texture, they find what the information is, and they set that to themselves. So how do we set up something like that? That sounds complicated, right? But fortunately, it's reasonably straightforward. It's a little clunky in terms of you've got to add a couple of volumes, but here's how it works. I'm going to right click, and by the way, actually to do this, just a heads up, you need to have enabled runtime virtual textures. Why am I not seeing them? There you go. You need to have enabled virtual texture support. Okay, so that you need to make sure that is checked on before you kind of step into what you're doing. So we've got that plugged in. We've got that set up. What I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to go to my my content browser, and I'm going to go to materials and textures, and I'm going to create a runtime virtual texture. I'm going to call this RVT_environment, and I'm going to open this up, and I'm just going to increase the quality of it a little bit. It's fine. Cool. So this is set up, and it's storing the base color, normal, roughness, and specular. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I want to store this information in my landscape. So I want to tell the landscape to save any of the information coming from it into a virtual texture. Now this, this I'm going to mention is a more advanced technique. a lot of folks aren't aware of this, so this is reasonably new in the grand scheme of things. So don't be don't be surprised if you can't find too many things online about how to set this up. But essentially, what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in the runtime virtual texture values, and I'm going to say I want to get the material attributes of your base color, of your specular, of your roughness, of your normal, great. And if I ever wanted to do something here, I could also say I want to get there's world height, and world height is asking for the height of the pixel that it's currently looking at. And what you can actually do is when we look at the world position, this gives you X, Y, and Z. And what I'm going to tell it is I want to break and just get the B channel. Okay, so I just want to get the height value, feed that into world height. And then I'm going to crash. Sorry, folks, I'll restart this 1 second. All right, sorry about that, folks. Just restarting this. Okay. Thankfully, we have reasonable recovery. This is still correctly set up, so I'm just making sure that everything's okay. Okay, I just need to do this part really quickly again. That's simple. Sorry about that, everybody. While I'm kind of stepping through this, does anyone have any other questions? Alex, is there anything you want to jump in on there question-wise? You're welcome to do it while I quickly play catch-up.
Yeah, actually, I want to answer Chris Erskine's question about is there a good way of using existing terrain models for base for a landscape? You can actually download or you can create R16 files, which are basically a grayscale 16-bit file, or even a 16-bit grayscale PNG, and then import that as a height map to your landscape. Combined with world composition, this is actually how I imported 100 square kilometers of Katoomba area in the Blue Mountains and put it into the engine. And world composition is basically a way to stitch together tiles of landscapes together. And to save memory, those sections of the landscapes only get loaded up when you're close enough to them. And that's part of the level streaming solution in the engine. And yeah, there's I've seen quite a lot of teams actually using world composition in really impressive ways. And I'm always keen to see what people are using it for.
Cool. All right. Cool. I got that set up. That's now correctly doing its thing. There's 2 more steps to get one of these things set up. The next thing is looking at the landscape, clicking on it, and plugging in the virtual texture that we've created, and say, hey, I want you to save this information to here. And then the final thing you need to create is a virtual texture volume. Now, a virtual texture volume is a volume that you need to wrap around everything that will be captured for your landscape. Fortunately, there's a great way to do that. You can literally click on your landscape and then say copy bounds, and it will automatically make itself the same size as your landscape, which is really useful. All right, where's my rock? There it is. Okay, so with those things set up, this should now represent well, so take a quick look at this. If I was to look at this rock and I was to look at its material, I'm just going to go all the way to its parent. This material here is the default Quixel material. And if I wanted to, I'm actually now able to do the exact same thing that we saw before, which was I could get all of these values that are here and I could save them to their own little material. I'll be honest with you, I was going to cover this in the tech art, but I left this in the description originally, so I feel obligated to still cover it in this session, even though it is a more advanced technique that I was going to be doing in a later training session. So my apologies. All right, so that's the default Quixel material. I'm just keeping it there for a minute. And what I'm going to plug in instead is the one that we just made, which is this. Now, assuming I didn't mess anything up, which is a big assumption, I haven't plugged this in just yet because I want to double check this is working first. What we should see, ooh, is not that. Ah, that's why. Done. So this, I know that looks a bit weird, but what we're actually seeing is it has the color of everything beneath it. Do you see that? Now the cool part of what I've just done is they all have the color of everything beneath them. But what that means I'm able to do is I can actually tell this thing to blend this color in. It's the predator, yeah. I can tell this thing to only blend in whenever it's close to the ground. Okay, so what that means that we can do is in the Quixel material, I could actually say, hey, I want to know how high the ground is, and then blend from one thing into the other. So to do that, I need to actually create one other virtual texture, which is a little bit of a pain, but you only need to do this one time for your project, and then every rock and everything else will just blend and look gorgeous all the time. And that's great. So I'm going to create one more RVT and call this RVT underscore environment height. I'm going to tell it you're storing the height. I'm going to tell the landscape I want you to make sure you keep an eye on the height. And finally, the last thing I'm going to do is go back to this volume, copy and paste it, and tell it to also store the height. And I know that was a lot of things. There is the documentation on this will run you through the setup there if you want to do this for yourself. But it's more important to me that you know how to do this. There it is. But now we're storing the height values. And because we're storing the height values in my material, I can say, what is my height? Now, if you think about, I'm going to have to use some hand gestures here, so let me just switch back to camera. All right. So if you imagine that this here is 0, 0, 0, that's the height that we're looking at, and something here is 10 centimeters above it, then my height is a value of 10, and therefore this distance is a value of 10. Now, if I was to move this up, but also move this up, what we end up with is, if this was a value of 10 and this was a value of 20, because that's their height value, this value minus this value tells me the distance between those 2 points. Does that make sense? Like how high I am above minus the things below me's height above tells me the difference between those two values, okay? Now I bring this up because that little bit of logic there of A minus the landscape height is now going to tell me how close I am to the ground. Oops, I should put that on camera. So that's going to tell me how close I am to the ground. And if I wanted to, I'm just going to divide that by, say, 50. I could do the exact same thing that we did before, where, remember, what I was doing was I could say, whenever we're close to the ground, I want to blend material attributes. Oh, actually, I should clamp this. So clamping means don't let a value go above this or below this. So whenever it's close to the ground, I'm going to say be this. And whenever it's not close to the ground, I'm going to tell it to be that. And in theory, as long as I'm doing my job right, just putting some comments here so you can understand what's going on. I am not doing my job right. I'm getting my heights minus the height beneath me. I'm getting... Sorry about that, folks. Just quickly working out what I've done. It's interesting because it is working here. I know what I've done. My apologies, folks. Okay, looks like I made an error somewhere and I'm not getting the height data correctly. Any ideas, Alex, while you're on the call?
Just answering questions. Interesting.
Yeah, I would have thought this was the way to do it. Which should have worked. I'm just going to check if this does anything when I go above the world. Oh, there it is. Which I suspect is a value of 0, 0. Yeah, pretty close to it. Okay. You know, there could be one thing here. I'm just going to quickly try this one instead. Which shouldn't have to be it. And now I have the opposite problem. Which actually may be correct. Alright, sorry about that, everybody. It looks like I've messed something up, but I'm not sure what it was, and in the interest of not keeping you all up late, I may have to declare a loss of this one. Which is awkward. Yeah, it's only changing at 0, 0, it seems. There it is there. So my apologies, folks. Looks like I have something wrong with my blending. Something's not saving out correctly. The logic is correct.
Yeah, is it working just from the 0 position? So
Yeah, it is.
where are
It's reading in a
yeah.
0 value. Ah, I may. Yeah, okay. No, I got it. My logic was totally fine. I forgot to tell this
Yeah.
one to look up the height. I forgot. All right, I quit. I'm out. All right, my values are now huge because I need a huge range to test this, which was 2 meters from the ground. So I'm going to drop this down to like 10 centimeters from the ground and 20 centimeters from the ground. All right, sorry about that, everybody. But this is now correct. So you can now see that as this goes into the ground, it's actually going to pull it in. Now, ideally, you would want to have some vertex checks that were saying, hey, only do this on the pixels, on the vertices that were facing upwards as well, which is a surprisingly easy thing to run through. But we're now able to do this with every Quixel asset we want. And this will always map correctly to whatever ground I'm kind of putting it onto, which is great. My apologies for that being a slightly more roundabout way than intended to get where we are, but we did get there. So if I make that bigger, you'll see it. Great. Cool. Yeah, that was kind of, I just wanted to kind of bring that stuff up because we could use the same thing for the grass to actually have the grass coloration being the grass coloration of the world. In fact, if I could do that, I think in about 2 clicks now that we've done all of that setup, setting that up for the grass, for instance, should just be a matter of looking at the grass material and plugging it in. So all I need to do is say sample runtime virtual texture. If I wanted to be really crude in how I set this up, I could literally just plug in that immediately. Just need to tell the world position before offsets. And this should now make the grass the same color as the ground beneath it. Someone asked if it bakes. So it doesn't do a bake. What it literally does is the first time a pixel is ever rendered, it kind of caches that value, and then so it's kind of like an on the fly kind of system, and it saves it to a virtual texture. Now, how I just did this was pretty ugly. I should have a gradient going from one color to the other, but you can now see that this grass is actually sampling the color of the things beneath them. And you know, if I had set this up properly, that's actually much harder now already to tell where the grass and the texture. It's actually really cool. So I probably should have a proper blend going on there, but see how that's super hard now to see where the grass is actually running into the final thing. And obviously, you know, I'd want to balance this all out and make it look nicer. And to be blunt, if this was actually a slightly nicer value, it would probably look okay. Hey, that went better than expected. Maybe I should just do this on grass instead of rocks all the time.
Yeah, I think it's totally.
But does everyone see how that's like it's actually legit difficult now to see where the grass is kind of coming from and how that works. So yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff, look, it was a bit of a laborious setup to get that environmental, like the RVT the first time. But once we got the RVT up and running, that virtual texture data can be pushed to anything. And it's reasonably performant. And you can actually use it, if anything, to save a massive amount of performance, because you can cache the value of the RVT and feed it back into the landscape. So the landscape runs its complex calculations one time, it stores that information, and then it has a very cheap way of looking it up afterwards. And this is used in all sorts of projects. And there was a great demonstration by Ryan Brooks of this being used on Fortnite as a way of saving like the cost overhead for when you're looking at the landscape. There's a pretty serious performance boost. So yeah, it's a pretty great feature. And once you're caching the data for itself, everything else just has access. So that's really great. Cool. So that kind of brings me to the end of the content that we were covering in today's session. I hope this was somewhat useful. I know I definitely breezed through some things. Is there any other stuff that has someone asked how exactly would you go about caching it? That's super simple. If you look at this material, I disconnect this, and I would literally just say, oops, sorry. If I can type this in correctly, in the same way that I sampled it in the grass, I would now actually just sample it here all over again. So it's actually that simple of just running it back into itself, because it runs this path first and then it runs this one and looks it up. So it's reasonably straightforward. But yeah, like I said, it gives you information that you can then feed to everything else, which is really wonderful, because you can put all sorts of crazy stuff into an RVT, and just look that information up and cache it. And that's this is a way more advanced thing than the intro to exterior landscapes at the end here. Sorry, but hopefully you understand some of the power that's kind of sitting there under the hood. Any other questions for us tonight? Any questions regarding the competition itself? If not, I just want to step people through a couple of examples and like just general learn samples that could be useful for this. Just going to quickly load one of them up. I have a question about gear. Any recommendations for a desktop computer setup for Unreal at around the 3K mark? So the question was like, what kind of system would you want to run something beefy in Unreal? I mean, if you want a best case scenario right now, it would be probably a 2080 with 32 gig of RAM and a beast processor and an SSD. I mean, this is one of those things of, for 3K, you probably want to get an absolute beast. But I'm just going to quickly step through some stuff. So here we go. So this is the content examples. I've shown this project off before, but I do really want to stress that if you are doing any environments and stuff, this content examples project is really, really, really good. So like if I want to look up anything for what I'm doing here, like if I open up the landscapes, this will show me like the basics of how some of these landscapes are set up. And I have to build shaders, but it will show me like a little mini landscape here that's been set up and how road splines can be used and like little foliage types and such. There's a lot more throughout the other samples, so I'll just quickly tab over to that. If you go to the Learn tab of your launcher, give this just a second to catch up, you'll see we actually have quite a few demos, but as far as the outdoor environments are concerned, there's a few that are worth noting, but I'm actually going to tell you to be very, very careful of. One of them is A Boy and His Kite. Now, A Boy and His Kite is gorgeous. It is this beautiful, like large-scale outdoor environment, and it's very, very, very pretty. However, it's unfortunately very, very, very expensive to run in terms of like the target specs that it's suggesting are a pretty serious computer. So not as serious anymore, I guess. Its target spec was for a GTX 980 with 50 gig of storage, and the first time you ever launch it, it will take a little while. So be warned that it will take some time. It's worth, if you ever go to run this project, download it. I highly recommend it for anyone that's doing film and like just anyone that is wanting to check out some film work and shorts that could be done in Unreal, because this is a gorgeous demo. And you can examine it, you can rip it apart, you can pull things from it as you see fit, but it is filled with 8K textures, and it is filled with like super high resolution stuff. So it does take a while to open the very first time, and I'm just warning you there, because the very first time you ever open it, it has to build a bunch of stuff in background. So that's incredibly useful, really powerful, but also just make sure you're only doing that when you don't have to necessarily do anything else for the next 30 to 45 minutes, because sometimes it can take some time. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is actually in the marketplace. So this is also pretty high res, but it is pretty powerful. If you open up, if you do a search for the word Paragon, you'll find obviously all of these characters, but the one that I want to open, so the one that I want to open is this one, which is Paragon, Agora, and Monolith. We've had a question about marketplace purchases for Film Victoria. If Meredith is still floating around the chat, are you able to answer that one, Meredith? Now, the assets here, this is for again, an outdoor environment. You can examine all these assets and see how things are put together. But being able to kind of rip apart a little micro environment like this, which is also, again, it'll take a little while the very first time you open it. But it's gorgeous. It's got some really great effects going on inside of it. And it might be a good reference point. That will as well, though, take a little while to build. So just be warned that those two projects are probably the longest lead up that there is. So just there be dragons, that's all. As far as other resources, Alex, is there anything in particular that you want to call out?
Content examples always. The monthly free assets that always come out as well.
Yeah, the monthly free assets. So every month we give away new free stuff. So if you go to here and you go free, there's free for the month, which if you claim, you have it for good and you can use it in any of your projects. And then there's permanently free. Permanently free is because, again, we have all sorts of deals where we just purchase assets. So these are really, really good. And these would be a really good start as well, because most of these have some pretty solid demo scenes that you can just rip through. Some of these in particular are quite gorgeous. And there's also a bunch of other things that are quite good for outdoor environments, such as like animal packs and fantasy creatures and such. So pulling these apart is well worth it. And of course, on top of that, you've then got Quixel, who have an absolute wealth of tutorials and such that are worth examining. But yeah, these are all grey because I own them, I've claimed them. But yeah, this is all free content. So these ones here are the free forever. But if you go for free for the month, this is the stuff that there is available right now. Actually, this seems well and truly on topic, which is there's a tropical jungle pack that's currently available that you could check through. It's notable that one of the things that Quixel doesn't have is fully fleshed out trees. There's a lot of rocks, there's a lot of small ferns, there's a lot of like general biomes, and all sorts of gorgeous stuff, but there's no trees from the trunk upwards. So picking up some of these packs, especially when they're free like this, again, like I said, if you claim this, you're good. Now, we did have a couple of people just during the chat ask about resources on where to find discussion and where to go from here. Once again, I would stress the Unreal Engine forums, the Unreal Engine Australia Facebook group, which is a community-run Facebook group, but there's a lot of great people in there, the Unreal Engine Virtual Production Facebook group, and the Unreal Engine Oceanic Discord, which I've just made Alex speed run through all of those links. But the Oceanic Discord is really, really great. And we've had a great community kind of forming on there from the virtual production side of things. So that's well worth checking out. Any other questions? Someone said, I've tried the virtual remote control Paragon project, but the streaming on iPad is very jittery. So if you're finding that there's jitter from some virtual capturing, you may want to look at either your connection speed or alternatively look into the iPad there's a connector that is for Ethernet. So if you're finding one or two of those as an issue, you could potentially go down that route. Someone said, I've missed the entire first 2 hours. Where can I rewatch? This link that you're on at the moment should cache, and you can come back to this link. The main link though that we have, the box link, actually saves out. Sorry. We're updating it regularly with the previous webinars and having everything applied there. So you can open those up and kind of examine how to do things. Once again, I do want to stress, everyone's been emailed it, but if you email sfc-anz, again, if you have questions or concerns about the competition, the team's here to help. So, I mean, obviously don't spam us with, hey, how do I do this? And then how do I do this? But if you're trying to ask about how to general sanity checks and you want to book some sort of call before the end of the application period, let us know and we can try and set something up to have a short discussion about your project if you're concerned about viability, or if you're not sure of the best approach for certain effects, or if you're not sure about the best approach for something on a technical level, or just resources that you could find out more information. Don't get me wrong, do your best to bring these things up in the Discord, because Alex and Tony and myself were all floating around this Discord, as well as a few other folks from Epic. But if you're finding that you're not getting the answers there, please, we're here to help, and we really want to see some great stuff coming out of this. So it's in our best interest to help everybody, right? So please do reach out. I got to warn you though, after last night's mail out, our inboxes got a little hammered, so it may take me a little while to catch up if any emails come through in the next couple of days. As far as a heads up on what's coming down the pipe next, tomorrow I'm doing I'm starting off with a whistle stop tour through Sequencer, which is going to be showing you the basics of setting up an animation inside of Unreal Engine, how to get a character just doing stuff. I'm going to be running through the basics, but then we're actually moving on to, I'm getting someone else, actually 4 other people it turns out, to help me with the advanced sequencer webinar that's happening later on. So the evening session tomorrow is advanced sequencer, and it's going to be covering control rig. It's going to be covering facial capture using an iPad. It's going to be covering running motion capture into Take Recorder, and it's going to be covering using LiveLink to get animations straight into Unreal without having to export and import and go through all of those shenanigans. So hopefully that's going to have some value. I've pulled in we pulled in a different team to kind of handle that one, because I'll be honest with you, if you put me in Unreal Engine, I'm pretty solid at what I do. If you get me using external tools to handle things like LiveLink and whatnot, it's just never really been my domain. So I wanted some people that had really handled animation to have the discussions with you about the finer points of import pipelines and things, because it's just not really the space that I personally I generally work in on the day-to-day. So the team there is a training team that I've worked with a bunch of different companies, and we're pretty excited to have them on board for this, because I think it'll be a really great presentation. It's looking at about the 2.5 to 3 hour one. So that advanced one will be a longer call, but they're covering some really cool stuff. So I think that was about it from me for the core stuff. Do you want me to? Are there many questions that are popping up here, Alex? I've been trying to field them as I go. I can pull it over to the camera chat, and we can have a bit of a screen share for any other questions that may have popped up.
Sure. Yeah, I guess the one question is, Jack Wolf asks, I'm having a problem. I don't have Blueprint on the mass brush plugin.
Hang on one sec. I'm just switching over to. Oh, we don't have cameras running.
Right, so
Okay, sure. All right. So sorry, what was that? What was the question on that one, Alex?
the question was, find the land brushes.
With regards to landmass brushes, so you can't see them at the moment, or you're looking to create your own?
He doesn't have the blueprint option for the landmass.
Okay, so if you don't have the blueprint option, try turning it off and on again. No, try setting your mode to placeable, and then set your mode back to landscape. It seems like the very first time you're ever in it, it won't be there. Unless you're asking about the blueprint option, meaning which blueprint to select, at which point you need to make sure that your landmass plugin is turned on. But if you're not seeing some options in the landscape sculpt mode, you need to just make sure that edit layers is enabled and that you've gone to place mode once and then gone back to it. For some reason, there was a slight issue that popped up in the recent builds.
Wolf Watson asks, suggested next steps for improving your exterior environment.
Suggested next steps. Honestly, it's examining what's been done and getting a feel for what kind of little effects go a long way. Things like particle effects, like for wind, dust, water, drips, sound goes a huge way. Unfortunately, we don't have any sessions that are directly covering sound throughout this. We'll be using sound here and there for certain things, but I don't have too many sessions that are doing deep dives on it. I'll try to cover some more of the basics of sound in the sequencer demo. But that kind of stuff, I think, next steps would be just examining any resources you've got. I'd start with the marketplace content and just have a bit of a browse around that content. After you've had a look at some of those, I would then probably graduate to the Boy and His Kite demo. Again, though, you just got to be aware that the Boy and His Kite demo can just take a little while to open for that first time because it has to generate MIPS, I think, for all of the 8K textures, so it just takes some time. My apologies. Someone said totally overwhelmed. Okay, hopefully it was still in a good way, and I haven't scared you all off. Everyone will be making their short films in Game Maker, so hopefully we're okay. Any other questions that have popped up here?
Not so far, I don't think.
Great. Oh, actually, one thing I forgot to mention that might be a good thing to look at as well is it may be worthwhile checking out if you go to the Epic Games Store. Don't worry, I'm not selling you anything. But if you go to the Epic Games Store and you load up the Robo Recall mod kit, Robo Recall was a AAA game that was developed by Epic Games a little while ago. But you're actually able to open the projects for that. Now that's statically lit. It's not using all of the bells and whistles that I showed you today. But having an idea about how some of that geometry was composed for a city-style landscape, it's good to kind of browse through some of those environments and just get a feel for what was modular versus what was larger meshes, and that kind of stuff might be helpful. Someone said there was a question about funding for external resources. Tony, you're probably the best person to answer that one.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be an issue at all. We actually expect you to grab a few external resources and not create everything from scratch. So that would not be an issue from our side. I mean, double check the guidelines, but I very much doubt it's going to be a problem with screen agencies either.
Yeah, you'll need to double check with your respective screen agency. But from our side of the fence, it's fine. So good luck. Yeah. Any other questions that are popping up here?
There's actually a question about VDB import. As far as I know, I don't think there is any VDB import. We do use the VDB library for the proxy load plugin. I know that for sure, but in terms of the actual asset, I don't think there is one.
One thing, someone said you should probably introduce yourselves. My apology. I'm just like, Tony, get in here. Sorry. Sorry. So we have the three of us are the familiar faces that will be popping up throughout these sessions. We've got Tony Reed, who's the territory manager. We've got Alex Stevens, who's an evangelist, and he's more on the engineering side. You're going to get a lot more acronyms out of him than me. And I'm a tech artist, so I'm kind of more of the generalist. So when it comes to kind of introducing people to the engine, unfortunately a lot more of that falls into my area. And then when it comes to like really in-depth discussion, I'm just like, Alex, I need you.
Yeah, don't ask me to do that.
So you'll see my face popping up running more of the tutorials, but that's not for it's just different types of expertise. But yeah, Tony's this was his brainchild and territory manager, so this was his way of kind of hoping to see some exciting stuff coming out of the local industry. And Is there anything else we should mention? It's probably worth actually mentioning again the chain, the announcement of the number of results that we're accepting, Tony.
Yes, so I know there is the view that we are funding one film per state, which is actually true, and that's guaranteed. There will be one film per state and territory. But we're also funding an additional 8. So we're actually funding 16 short films in total. So the rest will be, based on the pitches we received. There was a question about the criteria guidelines that Epic uses or we're going to use. I think the most important thing to remember when you're talking to Epic is we see technology as a means of support and helping people. That's what we view technology is just a thing to bring people together. So what we'll be looking for is how you use that technology to tell your story. So we're interested in seeing you apply your craft and using the technology to do that. That's it. You don't need to impress us technically. That's really not of interest to us. It's what you're actually going to create. So that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting that most of what I was doing tonight, apart from maybe the RVTs, was it was less about necessarily the final product and a lot more about how to get a lot of things done quickly and how to handle workloads that would have seemed otherwise insurmountable. So just making sure that we're able to handle things I wanted to show you procedural foliage because I wanted you to be like, yes, I can actually engage in a large outdoor environment and not be kind of scared off by something like that. It is manageable. Cool. Anything else popping up that you saw through the chat that I may have missed that we should come back to, apart from the ongoing saga of Andrew Mackenzie compiling his build? So many updates.
Not that I think of. Just a couple of issues with the Landmass plugin not showing up and stuff.
That's Jack.
But we can follow up with that.
Sure. Okay, well in that case, thank you all very much for your time. I hope tonight was useful. It didn't blind too many people with science, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of you in the future sessions for Sequencer ones tomorrow. Have a good day.
Cool. Catch you later, guys.
Good night.
Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a ball now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now?